恭喜恭喜. Happy Year of the Snake. I touched a snake for the first time. It was not that long ago, a couple weeks ago, at a Lunar New Year party, where the hosts had really pulled out all the stops. And among some of the festivities, they had brought in a live snake from a science education program for people to interact with. And I have to tell you, I'd never actually touched a snake before that moment. And the experience was pretty neat. And I'll admit that I was a little more intimidated than I thought I would be. And when the time came where it was my turn to have an experience with the snake, I couldn't quite bring myself to drape the snake around my shoulders as some of the others had done, but I did manage to hold it. And what struck me most were the ways that it differed from my expectations. The slow, deliberate movement, that part didn't surprise me. But what truly caught me off guard was the texture of the skin. There's this fascinating quality to it. There's actually a sort of slack between the skin and the muscle that make it feel almost more like human skin than the coarse reptilian armor that I was expecting. So to actually touch the snake, to feel it for what it really was, that was a valuable moment where my preconceptions were tested. This experience has been sitting with me as I reflect on our readings for today. At their heart, both D.H. Lawrence's poem, The Snake, and The Legend of the White Snake are about encounters with things that defy our expectations. In Lawrence's poem, when the narrator meets a snake at a water trough, he finds himself caught between, on the one hand, his instinctive sense of this creature's nobility, and on the other hand, the voice of my education telling him to kill it. There's this beautiful moment where he recognizes the snake as one of the lords of life, but then his education kicks in, telling him that gold-colored snakes in Sicily are venomous, that a, quote, real man would kill it. The tragedy of the poem comes when he finally gives in to those voices and throws a log at the snake and immediately regrets what he calls a pettiness. In The Legend of the White Snake, we see an almost parallel example of this dynamic. A powerful snake spirit transforms into a human and falls in love with a mortal man. Their love is genuine. They help their community through their medicine practice. They're building a life together. But then comes the monk Fahai, who can only see the world through his rigid categories. To him, she can only ever be a demon, regardless of her actions or the reality of who she is. In contrast, her husband, Shu Xian, though initially frightened when he learns her true nature, ultimately chooses to honor that genuine humanity that he has experienced in her, saying, human or not, I will always love you. Both of these stories speak to this very natural tendency we have to judge when confronted with something radically different from our experience. We seem to have this deeply ingrained instinct where encountering anything in the world, we immediately judge. Is this wrong? Is this dangerous? And if we decide it's not dangerous, we rush to ask, is this useful? If it can't harm me, how can it help me? Over these last few years of our tortured online existence, I found myself in countless situations on social media where I see this dynamic play out. You watch people get into disagreements, and it becomes painfully clear that they're not actually arguing with the person in front of them. They're arguing with people who aren't even in the room. They're running through scripts in their heads, defaulting to the voice of their education, instead of listening to what the actual human being in front of them is trying to share. So we have this instinct. And honestly, it's not such a terrible thing. After all, it's adaptive to be able to tell what's good and what's bad, what's helpful and what's harmful, and to take action based on that difference. But in the moments before that happens, what if there's something else we could do too? What if in the space before we rush to the determination of our response, we could simply appreciate the existence of what's in front of us? What if our very first question wasn't, what can this do for me? Or what harm might this cause? But rather, what is this really? And how might I honor what's actually there? And this is what I mean when I talk about honoring, acknowledging and bearing witness to something for what it truly is, for its own sake. This is what I'm trying to do over at the San Francisco Contemplarium, which is the community institution where I serve as the founding director. We're building the muscles to honor the human journey and the full spectrum of experiences we have as human beings for their own sake. That is, we honor our experiences simply because those experiences are owed it. We treat them with care and respect because they deserve it. Not just because it's therapeutically helpful for us to do it, even though it can be, nor because there will be some social good that will come out of it, even though there will, but we do it because we recognize the intrinsic worth and importance of doing that honoring. So to make this possible, we create spaces that allow this honoring to happen through public events, through programming that deepens our capacity for honoring our humanity, and through physical installations and pop-ups in the neighborhood. Our flagship event is our series of reflection jams that happen in the evening on the first Sundays of every month, where people engage in guided journaling and sharing that allows them to honor their own and others' humanity from their experiences of the past month. As one participant recently told us, it was a lovely, beautiful time to be, to pause, to let all those unfelt things be felt, unnamed moments to be spoken. This work feels especially crucial right now, in a world where so much suffering and injustice is being wrought at the highest levels of power. We're seeing the rise of authoritarian movements that explicitly reject the idea of our shared and equal human dignity. We're witnessing existential crises of climate change and artificial intelligence that threaten the very foundations of our human existence. We're experiencing painful national divisions and needless cruelty to those who are most marginalized and dehumanized by the powerful. And here in our own city and our own community, we're grappling with stark inequality, suffering on our streets, and to mention an issue that's very close to home on this new Lunar New Year with the ongoing impact of anti-Asian violence. Bearing witness to suffering, naming suffering, honoring that suffering is critical in a moment like ours. But I often hear people ask, what's the point of just honoring, of just bearing witness? Shouldn't we be going out and changing things? Let's skip the sitting there and lamenting. When something tragic happens, they say, thoughts and prayers don't do any good. They're useless. I hear this criticism often, and I get where it comes from. When children are killed in school shootings, when communities are devastated by natural disasters, when people are suffering from systemic injustice, it can feel almost offensive to offer something as passive as thoughts and prayers. We need action, we want to say. We need change, not empty words. And yet, as I've seen this play out over and over again, I've come to believe that something as perfectly useless as thoughts and prayers is actually profoundly, profoundly important. There's an old phrase that gets passed down among ministers. Don't just do something, stand there. Don't just do something, stand there. It's jarring and funny to hear because it's a deliberate reversal of the common saying, don't just stand there, do something. And yet it perfectly captures the centrality of honoring to everything we do because, and this is the point I want to make, honoring gives meaning to everything we do. Because in fact, honoring and action are not opposites. Action is an extension of honoring. Think about what moves us to action in the first place. It's our very recognition of the dignity of human life, our honoring of the suffering that we witness. Why would we act if we didn't first honor the humanity at stake? Without this foundation of honoring, our actions are merely empty movements that run on reactive anger or fear rather than a deep recognition of what's at stake. Honoring is the basis from which meaningful action springs, and to forget honoring is to create action that will fade away as easily as our passing emotions of the day. I'm not saying thoughts and prayers and then no action, which I agree is usually what so many politicians hide behind. But I am saying thoughts and prayers and action. Because what makes honoring appropriate is what makes action appropriate. It's what we owe to the moment in front of us. We honor because the children who have died, that honoring is their due. We honor because the communities that are devastated, they are owed that honoring. And we honor because those suffering under systemic injustice, their suffering deserves to be honored. And as part of that honoring comes our action. This recognition that honoring and action are one thing has helped me notice how misguided I feel it is when people frame honoring as some kind of opposite to action. But it also helps me see why it might be so appealing. It's so much easier to avoid honoring our full human experience than to do it. Honoring can be hard and painful. It asks us to really stay present with what is true, which can be very, very difficult, rather than rushing to fix or change it. It requires us to let ourselves feel the full weight of whatever we're witnessing. It asks us to set aside our desire to be the hero that fixes everything. It means that sometimes, in the face of great suffering or injustice, we're forced to face our own helplessness, our own limits, our own grief. And yet, we do it. We do the hard thing to honor the entirety of our human journey because we owe it to our humanity and to the humanity of those around us. No more and no less. So, as we enter this year of the snake, it feels wonderfully appropriate that we get the snake as our inspiration. Snakes have remarkable sensory systems. They feel deeply. They use their whole bodies to sense and take in their environment. The snake moves close to the ground, slowly, steadily, with purpose, listening, feeling, honoring what is present before responding. This is the wisdom we're being invited into this year, to honor like a snake, to move through our world with that same quality of attention and presence, that same capacity to sense deeply through that soft, sensitive skin before judging, that same ability to honor what's actually present rather than what our education tells us should be there. Happy New Year. Gong Xi Ni. May we be blessed with the snake's wisdom, its patience, its deep sensing, its capacity to honor. May it be so.